The European Championship in Yu-Gi-Oh! Women in TCGs and a world champion worth $100,000. Leonard König was shocked as I told him, you can win even more than a Nintendo Switch when you compete at the highest levels of trading card events, at least in Flesh and Blood. But I was not less impressed as the passionate caster told me how Jessica Robinson, also known as the Wrecker Queen, fought her way into becoming the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Player in all of Europe. And Leonard really knows that, cause he is working as one of the prime casters at Yu-Gi-Oh! Events. So if you are coming as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player new to this channel, I'd like to welcome you and also talk to you in the comments down below. And before all Flesh and Blood players drop out, we also have some gold nuggets on Flesh and Blood, including a personal statement by the Mother of Dragons, Mara Ferris, about the importance of empowerment in TCGs. And you can even win a Fabled package for the calling in Birmingham, worth around 160 euros. Stick around till the end if you want to enter the giveaway that Living Realms made possible. Thank you so much, and now let's start with the interview. Hey Leo, nice that we see us together here online today. And I'm really happy that you're on the channel actually, because I wanted to talk to you for quite a while now. And just for the start, introduce yourself for the people that are watching.
Hi Alex, first of all, thank you for having me on your channel. My name is Leonard König. I am a caster for multiple games. Alex and I know us through Yu-Gi-Oh! He has also had quite the past in the game. We have played together in a small store in the middle of Germany actually. Basically in North Rhine-Westphalia, and yeah, I've been casting the biggest tournaments in Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently. I think they are the biggest TCG tournaments that we are having right now, maybe in the entire world, with about sometimes 3,000 participants or up to 3,000. And yeah, I'm a guy who loves TCGs.
Yeah, perfectly said. Exactly, that's the reason why we are talking today, because yeah, you are casting for Konami, the biggest tournaments, as you said. And yeah, just the last weekend was the European Championship in Utrecht. But before I want to talk with you about Yu-Gi-Oh!, I actually want to ask you a question about the TCG that I cover mostly on my channel, which is named Flesh and Blood. And I just want to know from you, like, do you know Flesh and Blood? And as a non-Flesh and Blood player, what is your impression from looking outside on this game?
I haven't played it so far. I have seen you play it with friends of mine in person and in videos. I have seen your documentation about the tournament in New Jersey, I believe.
That's right, yeah.
And it really impressed me. The players are really passionate about it. I love how players from other games also convert to Flesh and Blood because they like the way the tournament is organized and how the game is balanced. So I'm actually looking forward to try it out.
Amazing, okay. Yeah, we will definitely play it the next time we see us in person.
Yeah, we sometimes have issues scheduling to meet up, but we're gonna get there.
Yes, for sure. So let us come to the daily topic, to the very important topic actually, and that's Yu-Gi-Oh! So tell me a little bit more about the background that you have with Yu-Gi-Oh! So how important is Yu-Gi-Oh! In your life, and how did you come to actually join Yu-Gi-Oh! As a hobby?
Okay, so how important is Yu-Gi-Oh! In my life? It's really, really high in the importance ladder there. I've been playing it since I was a kid, basically. Of course, most of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Players have started in elementary school or stuff like that. I've watched the anime, and then I annoyed my parents until they got me some cards. But the competitive career, I think I went to some tournaments as a kid and as a teenager, you know. I annoyed my parents as much, and I'm really thankful for that, that my father drove me to a Pharao tour in Duisburg around, I think, 2004 or 2005. He must have hated that. He woke up at like 5, but he still drove me there, and the atmosphere there was just fantastic. So I went to small locals as a teenager, and as soon as I had a little bit of own money at university, I started going to like the international events. And ever since I went to Rimini 2015, I actually only missed out on one international tournament in Europe, which was in Utrecht, actually, 2019, because I had a work thing there and I couldn't avoid that. But other than that, I have been to every tournament as a player, judge, or as a commentator.
That's so interesting because actually the tournament that you just mentioned in Utrecht was my last Yu-Gi-Oh tournament, also with the
really?
team.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
you've been involved with our team Trend for a while, right?
That's right, yes. Not any longer, but yeah, back then we were on the team together.
Yeah, we actually disbanded quite shortly after that event, but we are back together now, and it's nice to have friends around and playtest for a while to prepare for tournaments together. But I mean, teams are obviously a big thing in Flesh and Blood as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Shout out to all the Team Trend members from back then and today.
I mean, you also had one on your channel already, last Nap.
Hey, that's right. Yes, Team Trend is making a mention here on the channel quite a few times now.
Huge impact on Tales of Alex.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I remember back then we were recording sometimes together too for Team Trend, so that was kind of a start, I guess. So pretty
Yeah, I
interesting.
was over at your place when I won the national championships in 2018, and we recorded the deck profile. And I was missing some of the cards because I just borrowed them, so I had to try and draw them. I just didn't want to make regular proxies. I just drew little trickster reincarnations on a piece of paper. That was funny.
I remember that video is, I think, still online on the Team Trend YouTube channel. So
I should have dressed up a little bit nicer for this, and also should have shaved before. I think I look really stupid in the video now looking back, but just try not to watch it.
I link it in the description.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so you already told me that Yu-Gi-Oh has quite an impact on your life and from an early age on. So is there somewhat of a special card that you have a really deep connection to, or a moment that you want to share with us?
Yeah, in terms of cards, definitely Chaos the Shadow Monarch is one of my favorite ones of all time. The card has had a huge impact ever since it came out in, I think, 2008-ish. Might be 2007, might also be 2009. Probably 2008. The card was, obtainable in like a structure deck that you pay 10 euros for. And this was just a card that everyone could easily get. I was a kid, I had really limited amount of money, basically 10 euros per month. So it was really nice for me to get such a powerful card for my deck, and I could play it until like 2013 in meta decks. So I was really in love with that card. Also, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Time Wizard, different formats are a thing now. Time Wizard is what we call like the old formats. Other games call them differently. And you can play this everywhere. And I just love Chaos a lot.
So I remember that card too. It's interesting that you mention it because before we actually got to know each other, I was playing with some friends, Yu-Gi-Oh! 2, but just casually on the kitchen table. And we were buying cards online on eBay, just random cards that we thought are funny or good. And I remember Caius 2, so I was searching on eBay and that card came up. And back then that was like for me insane that you could summon this monster and then just banish like you do with Black Luster Soldier. And I was like, whoa, what? Who comes up with these ideas?
Damage.
Yes.
Just 1,000 damage sometimes.
So pretty interesting to know now.
Yeah, the card has made a huge impact in the game, and also the artwork is really cool.
It is, yeah. It looks amazing as an ultimate rare too. So you also play Time Wizard formats yourself, right? That is like a passion of yourself.
Yes. I've played those for multiple years now. I mean, there's this term called hipster, which describes people who like things before they are cool, and I see myself as a 2010 Time Wizard hipster because I was annoying people to play it with me years and years ago, even before this format got popular again. I've always loved the history of the game. Reason I became a caster as well was because I'm a fan of all of those pro players. And naturally, I just like to remember players who are not in the game anymore or just not as active anymore. And I like to rewatch old featured matches. And yeah, just playing those old decks just reminds me of all of those players. And also, of course, shows how different the game can be from time to time, right?
Yeah, that's something I remember you for years now, because you were always like collecting cards for your old school decks, and for Edison format, for Dark Arm Dragon and stuff like that. And I remember you were also mentioning back then, I think, that you were around when Dark Arm Dragon was played, and it was like €100 card back then. So you are in the game for quite a while and deeply invested, so to say, emotionally, but also playing yourself.
Yeah, emotionally at Euros that you already mentioned earlier in Utrecht, I cried like 4 times over the entire weekend because players qualified for the World Championships. It was really emotional for me.
Yeah, that's like a really interesting part, the European Championship, and what kind of impact it has, not only for you, but for the TCG industry, but especially for the Yu-Gi-Oh community for sure, because this year the World Championship will be coming back to Yu-Gi-Oh, right?
Yes, for the first time since COVID, basically. Last year we had a European Championships, but they did not set up a World Championships. So this year it is going to be in Tokyo, which is incredibly cool. So there's even more at stake. Most people don't ever get to Japan in their lives. From the Western world, of course. And yeah, they also have a playoff in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now. Back in the days, it was only like top 3 or top 4 of Euros get to Worlds. So this is an insanely small chance that you also need a little bit of luck for as well. I mean, if you want to have a deep run in a tournament, there is also luck involved, of course. It's a card game. But this time, actually for quite a few years now, there is a playoff even where the most successful players of the entire last year, ever since the last Euros, are going to play in a playoff and qualify for more world spots. And we also got to cast those, and that was just absolutely insane.
So will you also be at the World Championship in Tokyo?
Unfortunately not. I would have loved to go, but no, I won't be there. I will watch it at home or with some friends. I think a friend of mine, who you also know, Steffen, he lives in Bavaria, and I will probably drive to him and then we'll make a weekend of it.
Yeah. So, sounds amazing nonetheless. Like, it's really interesting to see from outside now, because I'm not anymore that involved in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, but the World Championship was always something really special and something that is like out of reach for the like normal or more casual player. Because when I compare it to Flesh and Blood, which we will talk about later on too, is it's quite different there, at least from my experience. But before we talk about the European Championship and the World Championship and also the players, which are really important, and we will talk about them in more depth, tell me a little bit more about your way as a caster. Like, since when are you casting? Which games are you casting? And what was your biggest event till this day that you casted?
All right, so casting started in, I think, 2017 for me. There was a Facebook post of a company that basically asked if someone wanted to try out and commentate over regionals, because they wanted to set up streams for different tournaments. And regionals in Yu-Gi-Oh! Were, I think, kind of smaller then. There were big regionals, of course, but they were like in small villages, you know, around 60 players or something. And I would just use my weekends to watch videos of those or the live streams and then commentate over them. And gotten to cast some more tournaments. And at some point, after I won my nationals as well, Konami asked me to commentate over the German National Championships, which was at that time my biggest event, of course, the first official one. It was an amazing experience. I really fell in love with it. I felt really important with the suit and everything. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And after that, I got asked back for the German National Championships every time. I started casting YCSs at some point. I think the first one was in 2019, so there was a bit of a gap before that. I was still continuing to play those events most of the time. I dabbled in casting other games as well. In the meantime, there was Force of Will, which is another TCG, Dragon Ball Super, which was a really, really cool event. We were in the Atomium in Brussels, which is this big building that is formed like an atom. That was some kind of a European championship as well. They're really high stakes. They had like silver-plated cards that were prize cards. Incredibly rare. You couldn't get them otherwise. And yeah, now I have another big casting big regularly, which is Pokemon Go. So I am often seen on those Pokemon Go competitive scenes of the Play Pokemon Tournament series.
And who knows, maybe Flesh and Blood 2 in the future.
Maybe I should start playing the game before that, though. But yeah, I mean, if the opportunity ever arises, I would be interested in looking at it, of course.
Yeah. So I think something that is really interesting that you mentioned is that you were also a really deeply invested competitive player yourself, that you had quite some success. You didn't win a YCS or something like that, but on the national level, you had quite some success, and you were also traveling around Europe for the game. So you kind of know and see the game as one of the more competitive players today too, I think, right?
Yeah. So that's always interesting because we feature a lot of rogue decks on the stream as well. So we're always trying to show the spice to people. What kind of decks can compete with the meta decks? I mean, you will have definite meta decks in Flesh and Blood as well, and there will also be some more spicy options. You know, players who have thought outside of the box, not around the box. Build something completely different, which is maybe not as strong, but has the surprise factor going for it. And I love to see those, but every time I see a crazy pairing of two super competitive high-level players and we do not feature it, my heart bleeds a little bit, because I want to see the perfect plays of players. I want to see the pinnacle of gameplay, and this is what thrills me the most.
All right, and we will also see some of these games from last weekend when we talk about them. So one thing that I want to mention before we jump to the European Championship actually is the connection between Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh! So you, like you mentioned, had a past in Yu-Gi-Oh! You were at the old tournaments. You even got to travel to some of the first tournaments. And I mean, for Flesh and Blood, the creator of Flesh and Blood, actually, James White, also was in Yu-Gi-Oh! Back then. So he was organizing for Konami in New Zealand, the Nationals, and also other events. And he also had one of the biggest online stores back then. Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles, I think was the name. And yeah, that's like, I think some influence from Yu-Gi-Oh! For sure came over to Flesh and Blood. And also one of back then top players, Chris Gearing, is also one of the developers from the Flesh and Blood game. So it's really interesting that like some connections come together, and now we are talking about it in this moment here. So just to mention that before we now come to the European Championship. So let us actually dive into it from your perspective. So like, in a few sentences, what was the European Championship like for you? How was the weekend? And what did you experience there?
So if I want to go with the keyword, it's emotional, really. Of course, I already mentioned the playoffs earlier, and this is where everything goes down. The entire season builds up to this. Players are tracking the points that they're getting from smaller tournaments just to see who else gets into the playoff at the end of the year. It was a really close race this time. because of the national season that ended like 2 weeks before the Euros, right? So 2 weeks before, actually, there were still spots open in this World's playoff. And on Friday, where the actual tournament of the European Championships didn't start, we were pre-recording the featured matches for each round. And of course, those games were amazing. But every time Sebastian, Tom, and I, were my two co-casters there, weren't casting a match, we were just walking through the playoffs area, and we were watching many of our friends play, many of the players that we respect so much because they are just fantastic at the game. And, you saw great success, you saw people being completely, of course, sad is maybe not the right word for it, disappointed in their own abilities sometimes, which is not a good thing. But it's still so nice to see how many emotions this game brings out in people, because they will, of course, recover from this. They can be already proud of themselves to reach this playoff, and they will come back from this even stronger. And then, of course, you get to see even a close friend of mine qualified for the World Championships in Tokyo. And to see that, I even casted that match. That was crazy to me. I had like a completely red face when the camera turned back to us. I was about to cry, actually. So I really had to do a quick outro so I could run over and hug my friend. There were so many great German players, also fantastic players from other regions that I would have loved to see at the World Championship, but they didn't quite make it. But it was just a bit overwhelming. I had to recover from this weekend emotionally. I think I'm still not there yet, but maybe in a few days.
Wow, yeah, like just the mentions from you now is like, I can feel the energy from you, and also can imagine some of the pictures that you are talking about.
Yeah, when I think one of the pictures, don't even know if it was shown in the coverage, when Dinka Bui, a really famous German player, won his way into the World Championships through the playoffs. So you have to imagine, for the playoffs, it was 5 rounds of Swiss, and then a top cut of 4. And then the 2 semifinals were played. The winners advanced to the World Championships, and then the losers have to play out for the last spot, which is really climatic, So both of them just missed out on their first chance to go to to Tokyo, and then the last spot was still open. And for Dinka Bui, it was a horrible matchup. He was playing a deck that really does not have the edge against Sofian's deck, and he fought his way in game 3. It was the best match I have ever seen in my life. I wasn't casting it. I was sitting on the floor with the other spectators. We had around 200, maybe 300 people in the area, sitting there and watching it on the monitors that we had in front of the stage. And everyone was just freaking out. I was actually in a WhatsApp group. I was doing like a live feed, because those games weren't streamed live. They were pre-recorded to be shown on the weekend. And I was just typing, Dinka just activated this card. Oh, Sofian activated this card. And everyone was just going crazy. And as soon as Dinka Bui won, all the German people ran over to him, hugged him. They were sent off the stage immediately after that, of course, because for safety reasons and everything. And then Dinka Bui was still on the stage. They needed to take pictures of him. He was just standing there, not knowing what was going on. He didn't realize it. And all of the German people were standing there, just applauding the entire time and yelling his name for, I think, 5 minutes straight. And that was just beautiful and one of the most hype moments I've ever experienced in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Dinka Bui, he is our current German national champion. And he had a season where you have to imagine a YCS had about 2,000 players back then. He went 3rd place, 2nd place, and 1st place consecutively. And that's just, this guy's absolutely crazy, and he's always playing creative decks, so he's a real legend. And if any German player can win the World Championship, it's definitely him.
Wow. That's very impressive. I mean, from Twitter, I know that he is the national champion, but I have like no clue of the decks that are running around at the moment. So it's really amazing to hear that from you. Wow, really impressive. And,
yeah, Dinka Bui is kind of the GOAT.
Yeah, let's actually, I think we have a picture. I have a picture of, yeah, here it is. Dinka Bui is here on the left. And yeah, as you can see, he's like one of the few people, actually, I think it was 7 people, right? 7 players who were qualifying for the World Championship, and yeah, he is like one of the players that you are talking about. And on the right we have Jonas.
Yeah, good old Jonas Koschel, incredible German player, lives in the same city as me. He has been super successful. He suffers from second place syndrome. He was at the YCS in the finals once and he just didn't attack because he thought that maybe there was a bigger monster face down of his opponent, and if he just attacked then he would have won the tournament, but he got second place after that. He also lost the German Nationals finals. And yeah, in his playoff for the World Championships, he actually also did not attack, so he missed game and lost game 2. But then he was able to close it out in game 3. But he was really close to ruining that one for him. And Gabriel Sussi is already a European champion from 2018, so he has also been to Worlds, just as Jonas has. They both are back-to-back World Championship participants now, which is absolutely crazy. One of the best French players, totally deserved.
Yeah, I remember the tournament that you were talking about, Jonas' second place at the YCS from back then. I really remember that day and the tournament. So really, really nice to see Jonas here also today making it. And we also have, I have them here. These are the 4 other players that could qualify for Worlds, and we also have 2 German players here under them too, and Christian was also in the finals, right?
Yep, Christian played in the finals versus Jessica Robinson. Christian Thomas, also a really well-known player. He's famous in the German community, as you might say, and he really did a big oopsie in the finals, I gotta say. He basically had game. To be honest, this Euros was the event where the players were the most nervous I have ever experienced as a caster. The featured matches, sometimes there are some mistakes. It's in every tournament. There is a big nerves to it, right? You are playing in front of thousands of viewers. Those finals always get a few 100,000 views on YouTube. And of course you are nervous, but this tournament was really special. We have seen mistakes from players who usually would never ever do something like this. In this case, Christian had to deal any damage. And there were 2 monsters on the side of his opponent's field. And he just banished the wrong one. He just took it off the field, and then he couldn't attack anymore because there was a bigger monster on the side of Jessica, and then he had to stop his turn, and then she just won in the next turn. If he just banished the other card, he would have been the European champion, but he really fumbled it. But he's a fantastic player. He totally deserves his spot at Worlds. It's just it was a bit sad to see him lose the finals in this way.
Okay, we will actually come back to the player roster a little bit later inside of the video, inside of the interview. So let's jump back to Google Assistant is up. Okay. What I actually want to know is also you already talked about like Yu-Gi-Oh has some of the biggest tournaments at the moment, even the biggest, so to say. And for this tournament, the European Championship, how big was this tournament actually? And is this like one of the biggest tournaments that we have seen in the last years after COVID?
So this was actually not the biggest tournament so far, not even close, kind of, because there were 2,500 tickets for sale, which is already not the biggest tournament that we've had. We were really close to 3,000 in London. And 2,000 players showed up because you did not have to pay anything for the tickets because you got your qualification from the tournaments before. So many people bought their tickets to just in case they can get to the tournament. But 500 people unfortunately did not show up, but 2,000 is still a lot of players.
Yeah, so that is like no comparison for Flesh and Blood, to be honest. Like we have smaller tournaments there. And we don't even have something like a European Championship. So that's a really interesting concept that I hope we see in the future in Flesh and Blood. because we had last year something called the European Champions Battle. And that was like kind of a one-day tournament where all the national champions from Europe were invited, and they were battling against each other for the day, and then the best one of them were cured. So it is really, really amazing to see from outside that Yu-Gi-Oh! Get these like massive amounts of players attending the events, and also these different kind of flavors in the events, which we also have in Flesh and Blood, different flavors of events, but European Championship is something kind of really special, I think, also for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, as you say, because the player that wins this tournament is officially the best player from Europe, right? So,
yeah. It has a different ring to it. If you win a YCS, that's also crazy. It's basically the same effort than winning Euros. But people from outside of the game do not understand how prestigious it really is to be a YCS champion or Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series champion. But everyone understands that it is absolutely crazy if you are the European champion at something.
Yeah. I mean, we all have that friend that was like the world champion in karate or something like that, and we know like what. All right, let's touch actually on your job for the European Championship a little bit more. So what kind of task did you have for casting, and how was the casting team put together?
So put together, actually it was the Italians, as we call them. I mean, no Italians, they are Italians. It's Alberto Marazzi and Marcello Barberi. They've been doing it for years now, way longer than I am, actually. And they've been on the roster for like 5 years or so, or maybe longer. And yeah, then we have the British guys, Tom Payne, who has also dabbled in casting many other tournaments. I think maybe even longer than Marcello even, but he was in and out at the time. We have on the bottom right Nadia Mazzoni, who is one of the biggest content creators in Yu-Gi-Oh! That we have, known as Farfa. So he was a really nice addition. Ed Templar is our host. So he does not commentate over the games, he just introduces the players, does fantastic post-match interviews. And yeah, then you have Basti, one of my best friends, and me. We are the Germans in this case. And yeah, we are doing commentary and also interviews and pre-production. Not that much this event, because we had the World Championship playoff videos that we were showing in between the rounds. But for most of the other tournaments, for the YCSs and such, we do many interviews with pro players, and we do fun quizzes with that and just mini games. Because sometimes, if you're at a card game tournament, you know that some games, even if it's only a few hundred players, take ages, and some people are finished early. So if your featured match takes 10 minutes because one player just bricks and gets steamrolled, then you might have 40 or 50 minutes to bridge, and then it's good to have some fun quizzes or other mini games to do.
All right, and so how were your tasks put together for the weekend? Like, what was your main task? Did you switch? Like, did you have a schedule or something, or how are you casting with this team?
Yeah, we are casting in pairs of 3. So we have Sebastian, Tom, and me, and also Alberto, Marcello, and Nadia. And we had a schedule. We have a schedule that always switches up from events. You know, we are just taking turns on who is casting the finals, which is, I think, just fair. Funnily enough, casting the finals also means that you get the late shift, as we call it. So you have to be in the venue just for round 3, which is incredibly unfair to the other team, because you get to have a really chill breakfast, and you can take your time. You can, while you are having your morning coffee and your food, you can just put up your phone already on the table, and you can watch the stream and watch your co-commentators work already while you're just chilling out. And yeah, we're doing, like, most of the time 2 games, then the other guys do 2 games. Sometimes, just so the schedule fits, we're doing 2-2, 1-2, 1-2. So nobody has to cast for a crazy long amount of time in a row.
Yeah. All right, so these guys you are really close to at most of the events, and I mean, as you already said, like, Basti is one of your best friends, and you also know Yeah, Marcello from back then too. He was a really competitive player back then. Is he playing today in the meta too, or is he just commentating?
He's playing a lot of Time Wizard as well.
Okay.
I think, I mean, every time I hear him talk about the game, he knows a lot. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that he also still plays from time to time. Every season, all of us still do some national championship events. We are all just casting the ones in our own country. And then we are going to other countries to play the tournaments there. So I think in the last year, I don't know about this year's season of Marcello, he got second place in Greece. And he just posted a picture of him and his trophy and said Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like riding a bicycle. So yeah, he's still a fantastic player.
All right, really interesting to hear. So let's jump to a comparison. So I stop the sharing because I actually want to know a little bit more about the structure of the event. So when I look at Flesh and Blood, we have these big events called Calling and Pro Tour, and there are multiple days like Thursday to Sunday, Friday to Sunday, and all these days are differently structured. For example, we have like a banquet for all the pro players for the Pro Tour that is happening on Thursday before the event. And usually we get like information about new sets there, or we have an interview with the maker of the game. And people can come together, and on Friday then the tournament begins. But we also have like smaller tournaments happening throughout the weekend. So people that don't make it to day 2, for example, can join in another tournament on Sunday, which is called the Calling at the Pro Tour. And also there are like casual events that, for example, someone like me can join and just play side events and draft or whatever is your preference. And how is a championship like the European Championship in Utrecht structured for the weekend? Is it like just the main event and then you have Time Wizard, or how can I think of this event as someone that was not there?
So first off, we have the Friday where the points playoff is happening, which is really just for the few players who are there. You can also go there and watch on the big screens that we are having next to the stage. So if you want to do some public viewing, that's always possible. Fun experience. There is on Friday for also the YCS events a 3v3 tournament. So basically making this a team sport. That's really cool. People love to do those. You're just sitting there next to each other. You have 3 opponents. Everyone is playing a 1v1 game, but you are allowed to discuss and coach each other. And it's super funny if you're having an opponent sitting over there and you're going, 1 second, please. And you're discussing the next turn of your friend with him. So those are always nice. There are 2 versus 2 tournaments with a different rule set even. So you're starting with double life points, which makes some cards really crazy because, something even maybe Flesh and Blood players know, there is this card called Pot of Greed, which is really iconic, which just says draw 2 cards. Card is forbidden in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that's just like you get +1 for no effort. And there is a card that is called Ancient Leaf, and it says if you have 11,000 life points or 10,000, and in Yu-Gi-Oh! You start with 8,000, you can draw 2 cards. But if you're playing 2v2, you have 16,000 life points, so you can play multiple copies of that card, and this really affects your deck building. Never played one of those because they are just, I think, recent additions, and I was always working when they were on, but love to see it. We have different Time Wizard tournaments. There are tournaments on demand. You can ask for many different styles of public events, and once you have 8 people, you can play for some points, which you can get prizes of the prize wall. And yeah, there is even, this time there was a big Time Wizard tournament with even a top cut. Usually those are only Swiss tournaments, but this time there was even coverage for it, multiple pictures taken. Their top cut was sitting next to the European Championships top cut, so it was really a big deal. And I love to see that 2010 format. Even players from back then just come to those events again. Amazing. Just to play those. Zona Günger, a legend of the game, made top 4. And this tournament was also nice to see him again. So there are many different tournaments. You can always decide to just chill out at the featured match table. You can enter the venue without being a player, so you can just come there to socialize. And yes, it's just great fun altogether. But it's not just the main event or Time Wizard.
Yeah. And also something really special, I think, about these Yu-Gi-Oh events is that you have like this public viewing area, which you already mentioned, and players really gather there and, like for big football games, cheer on and are really powerful there on the big screen, watch the game that is actually casted. That's just something that's so amazing, and that in Flesh and Blood they were setting it up at the last Pro Tour in Baltimore. And I think there were some people watching there too, but it was not quite yet on the level of what I know from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or what I hear from your experiences. But that's I think that's really special that people can actually be there and, like you say, socialize also when they are not playing anymore. So
yeah, from
really,
the start
really
of day,
great.
you have to be really early there to have a seat. Even so, otherwise you will have to stand there or try and steal a chair from somewhere else just so you can sit down in the area, because everyone just wants to watch those big games. The community is really, I don't want to say in love with each other, but we're really close. And there's also people are really proud of the people they've also seen at regionals or something. Sometimes, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players travel to many events, so once you played versus someone, you are kind of bonding, and if you see them succeed on the big screens, it's always really something special.
So you would say that most of the players that are in the top cut you know personally too, or?
It has been more when I was a more active player, I'm playing locals from time to time, but back then, of course, you could interact with them more. Nowadays, I'm on those big events, I'm mostly casting, so I have to actually do a job even in between rounds. So I can't just talk to all of them anymore. Of course, I know them from paper. Most of them. There's always some rogue candidates who manage to slip in there, but I mean, out of 64 players this time, I think I have spoken to 60 before, and I know 30 much more closely. And it was also really nice, something I experienced this event in particular, that some of the pro players, which I really admire, which I have never gotten to talk to before, they approached me and we had a really nice conversation about the game. So that was always nice.
So that is also something that I think is really special for your job, right? So you can interact on a different level also with these players, because you are actually kind of working with them. And when you talk to them, it must be a special moment for not only the player, but also for you then.
Yes, of course. I see them basically every week in videos. Of course, I consume a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. I've seen them in the big tournaments, sitting there in the top cut, looking really cool with their cards, just using their brain right there to get to the next hyper-level combo. And as I said, I admire those players, so I'm always really hyped to talk to them.
Yeah. All right, so tell us a little bit more about the players from the top cut from the European Championship, which we saw some of them already, and one of our friends, Jonas, was there too. So who is the best of the best players from Europe? Is it we already saw many Germans under them, for example? Is it a specific country that stands out, or is it more diverse coming from tournament to tournament?
Actually, the Germans always have a significant amount of players in the top cut. Most of the time, if it's one of the big countries that the tournament was held in, that country might dominate. So Italy, UK, France, or Germany. Those are always the tournaments where you have a bigger part of the top cut that is actually from the country that you're playing in. But I think that the Germans and the French people, also the French people, are really up there every time. Italy was a great Yu-Gi-Oh! Nation, but that somehow has declined. I think that was maybe 10% of players in the top cut this time were Italian, maybe 15%. There were a lot more Germans and French people there, yeah.
So I think it's really interesting to see too from your perspective, because you have a lot of history in the game and you not only know which countries are good today, but which countries were good back in the day. So I think it's always also, when looking at this tournament and specifically, it's the European Championship. So we kind of want to see which country or which player is exceeding to the top and which country is the best of the best, so to say. Like, even when we have like 4 or 5 Germans in top 8, a player from the UK won this tournament. So we will actually talk about this more in a few seconds, but do you want to touch on the countryside anymore, or
Yes.
any additions to that?
To be fair, even though I just said that France and Germany are probably the biggest Yu-Gi-Oh countries right now, on the Euros level, the UK has been dominating for the last years. I think for the last 4 European Championships, we had 3 UK champions, which were Thomas Rose in 2017, I think. Then 18, we had Gabriel Soucy. And then we had Marcus Patel after that. Yeah, I think so. And then we also had now Jessica Robinson. I think, no, 2018 was Luke Parks. Luke Parks, I think. Thomas Rose might have been in 2016. But you know the drill. You know, there were a lot of UK players who actually won the European Championship. It was Parks, Patel, and Robinson who almost made it consecutively.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. I know one of that names from back then. I didn't met him in person, but it's really interesting to see that this kind of pattern is continuing till the modern days of Yu-Gi-Oh. So yeah, the guys from the UK and also the women from the UK are really passionate about Yu-Gi-Oh. So yeah, let's actually talk about the winner of the game, and which is Jessica Robinson, who she's also like the first woman to win like some kind of tournament level, like the European Championship. And I want to talk about this topic with you too, because you experienced it yourself. But this is also quite of a topic in Flesh and Blood, which I want to touch on a little bit too. But tell me from your perspective, like, what does this mean that Jessica won the European Championship in Yu-Gi-Oh! For the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, but also from the TCG perspective in general?
For me, it of course just means that Jessica is a fantastic player. For the game, I think I have seen on Twitter a lot that more women feel inspired to actually try and join those tournaments, because the lower numbers of women in Top Guts don't mean that the women are worse at the game or something. It just means that less women are participating in those tournaments. And of course, if you're having 3,000 players and 50 women are participating in the tournament, then the top cut is not going to be stacked with women, just statistically. So I think it's great that she won. I hope that more women feel inspired to join those tournaments. And yeah, we can just all have a great time together and play Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah, so I think you said it really well. So the inspiration that comes, I think, from this event is really amazing. And I also talked about this shortly with one of the women from the Flesh and Blood community, and told her, like, hey, in Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the biggest tournaments was won by Jessica, and her name is Mara Ferris, and she's also a really competitive player. So I just want to bring up a photo of her, so we can actually see her. So I will share the photo.
While you're getting up the photo, I can also say that the last Pokemon Go event we had in Europe, in Torino, we actually had 2 women in the finals.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing. I don't follow the Pokemon Go community, so I didn't knew that, but it's really amazing to hear it from you for sure. So yeah, this is Mara, as she is hugging the creator of the game Flesh and Blood, James White, at the winner ceremony of the last Pro Tour in Baltimore. And Mara was getting the second place, actually. She was very close to making it to the first place, but she lost in the finals again against Michael. And I was following Michael around for the tournament, so I was experiencing this game very closely. And Mara is a very high competitive woman in Flesh and Blood, and I actually also asked her, like, telling the story of what I saw about Jessica and what she thinks about these events happening, like her making the second place at the second biggest tournament in Flesh and Blood, and now that Jessica won the European Championship in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I got some sentences here from her that I will read out for us so we can actually hear some of these thoughts that she has about it. So she says that it honestly just makes me so happy to see women making inroads in competitive gaming spaces. It's really been a dream of mine for such a long time to see more women and our other gender minorities too being able to really prove that we are what we are capable of. I think we are starting to see a snowball effect too. So exactly what you were saying. For the longest time, girls have been sort of put out in gaming spaces, even if we don't go into the openly sexist boys clubs that some gaming groups can turn into. It's just hard to really be excited to dedicate yourself to a game where there's just nobody else like you there. So I've been in TCGs for a very long time, and I've definitely felt that struggle plenty of times in the past. But now we are starting to see more and more women doing well, which makes even more women starting to say, hey, if she can do that, maybe I can too. So I've already personally had several women come to tell me that I inspired them to start playing more competitive Flesh and Blood. And I think that really catches like this feeling that we see here, not only with this photo, but with the story of her making it to the finals of the Pro Tour, and now Jessica winning the European Championship. And for those people looking like for a place to get more information and hear more thoughts from players like Mara, I want to mention that there is a podcast in Flesh and Blood where they talk about these kind of topics, which is called the Pitch Perfect podcast. And they are also having a league at the moment. And I think I have here it is. I have the banner, which they already say like educate, empower, and support. And now they have this league where you can also get involved online with the players. So I really wanted to get this information out, and I think it's a perfect way of finding similarities inside of the games and also in between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Flesh and Blood. So it's very important that I think we talk about this even more in the future. Let's actually come to the topic of the meta, which I think is really important to talk about too. Coming to Euros, like, did you expect to see what in the end stayed on top, or was it kind of a surprise?
Yeah, the Rika deck that Jessica piloted is known in the community, of course, because it won the last European Championships as well. Fun fact, Jessica also built that deck for the European champion back then. She is, for a reason, called the Rika Queen. Many players have not read the cards yet, because the deck always seems like kind of a rogue deck. There always seems to be a better option, and it is a really, really complicated combo deck. So people just try to ignore it. Funnily enough, the combos always start off with one normal monster that doesn't even have an effect, and that has 0 attack points. And I did not expect to see Rika perform that well again. It wasn't a shock, to be sure, but there was a really open field in the metagame. And I thought that there was one deck that also was piloted by Jonas Koschel and Dinkabui that would just absolutely destroy the Rika deck. But there are some win conditions that the Rika deck has that you have to be some kind of lucky to find. And she just really showed in top 8 and top 4 that she could just beat the deck by finding those win conditions. So that went really well for her.
So what I hear often is that Yu-Gi-Oh isn't that diverse in their meta decks, but it was really astonishing for me to now see like exactly the opposite happening, having like no clue about the decks at the moment, seeing for sure that just from the reactions online that Jessica was somewhat on an off-meta deck, at least not one of the very favored decks, and that it is truly possible in Yu-Gi-Oh! Also to not just play one of the two best decks and make it. So that is like something that is for me really interesting to hear now more from you, because you are really deeply into knowing like what decks are out there and what is played. So what is your opinion about this?
Usually, I don't hate on opinions of other people, but I think this is kind of in that case, uneducated opinion, because there are always different formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! We have formats where basically only one deck seems to be the very best deck. I always tend to love those formats because you know what to prepare against. You know that if you can find the best tech cards, the best spice for your deck, then you're going to have an edge. If you know the matchup really well, you can prepare for it better, and there's going to be a huge skill difference. Mirror matches are always really skillful. I can imagine it's going to be the same in Flesh and Blood. And there are some formats where you can play 11, 12 different decks, and they are all basically on the same level. I think we had 8 different decks in the top cut of this European Championship with a rather high representation, and also a decent representation of the other decks. So it's the other category where they are not above 1 or 2 in the count of decks. So this is a really open format, and we have those occasionally. So there's always going to be a time in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you can play basically whatever you want.
Oh, yeah, it's really nice to see that and also hear it from you, because this like kind of shows a different light on Yu-Gi-Oh! From my perspective, and I also like from the comments that I saw online, I really saw like people were really like happy about Jessica winning with Rika, and we have multiple examples for that. But would you really say that as a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player, you don't need to focus like on these 1 or 2 decks that are really a little bit more better than the other decks, but you can rather freely decide on which deck you choose?
In those formats that are really diverse, it's really, really hard to prepare. You have to basically take a guess what you're going to face a lot. For those events, decks like Rika are a fantastic choice. Because Rika is a big combo deck, so you try to use your first turn to build up a huge field and hope that your opponent just cannot break it and can't play through the field, so you just take them out next turn immediately. So you're basically trying to play a deck that has a big enough win condition, also of course some drawbacks, but a big enough win condition that can just beat most of the field just on default. If your Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a side deck, which many other games do not have, there you will have to prepare your main deck for the biggest threats to your deck. In Yu-Gi-Oh! You can have the side deck, which consists of 15 cards. In that case, you don't really want to prepare for those rogue decks. You really need to focus on the decks that are your bad matchups, and if there are 12 decks in the meta right now, you will have 2 or 3 different decks that you are going to face eventually, and then you will have to be prepared, because in 12 rounds of Swiss you're only allowed to lose 2 times, and you are going to face those decks once or twice. So you really have to be careful about what you build your deck against. And then decks that nobody expects, like the Rika deck, which wasn't even nobody expecting it, but decks that you don't expect to play that often against, you can't really prepare for it, because in those diverse fields, it's too hard.
So it's really interesting for me to hear about the side deck from you, and in the importance of siding against different decks in the tournament and prepare for actually what is coming. But would you say that like in the side deck you you are prepared, or is it like more, okay, if I put in the right amount of numbers, then I have a chance, but otherwise I'm out anyways?
So I think you definitely have to have a big plan.
Yeah.
There are decks that, of course, if I'm playing against this, I might lose. I'm very likely to lose. But then you have to play the numbers game, right? If that is a deck that maybe has 1% attendance, then you can afford that. If you're playing against one of those, then that's just bad luck. But usually if you have bad matchups that are represented well, then you will have to have a plan. Otherwise, you're just a poor deck builder.
Yeah. Yeah, we have in Flesh and Blood, there is a deck called Kano. And Kano is a wizard, so he does arcane damage, which is kind of a damage that you have to be reliant on when you are the wizard, at least when you are playing Kano. And other heroes usually take in equipment to counter the arcane damage. So equipment is like the shields and the armor equipment slot, the head slot and stuff like that, where you can then really counter some of the arcane damage. But with Kano, we have a deck that is putting out like so much damage on the arcane side, and it's nearly impossible sometimes to just take it in, and then you are out. But that is, like you said, like not that many players are coming up with this deck. So sometimes when you face it, you're just like, okay, shit. When I don't make it in the first couple of turns, then I'm just dead because you're coming up with so much damage.
Yeah, there are some decks that are just, we call that high rolling. So that's what many players especially in the top 32 playoff chose to play in the Worlds playoff that we had on Friday. Because they knew, okay, I might not win through the skill difference because those are the other 31 best players in Europe that we're having right now. And I will have to try and high roll with my deck. So I'm bringing a deck that has a higher ceiling, but also has a high chance of me bricking or performing poorly just because of the nature of this deck. And I really like that choice, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see both reactions from the player that is choosing this deck and then the player that needs to play against this deck too.
It's scary all the time. If you're playing against a deck like this, you are never like, haha, I have a 60% of winning against this deck by default. It's like, oh no, please don't let it be the 40% I'm always going to lose.
Yes. Yeah, I know many faces from players from the bigger tournaments in Flesh and Blood that had to face the situation. So it's really interesting to see from the Yu-Gi-Oh side too. But let's touch a little bit more on Jessica's deck here, Rika, because I have no clue what this deck does. You explained a little bit about it already, but how do you think she managed to win with this deck actually? Because there were clearly some counters, as you said, running around, and we also want to, in a few seconds, watch one of the moments where she actually won. So from your perspective, how did she manage to pilot Rika to winning this tournament?
So, of course, you need a little bit of luck as well. I'm already going to touch on that clip a little bit there. Some matchups aren't that great for the deck, and you need a little bit of help by Fortuna. But she is probably the best Rika player in the entire world because she has been playing the deck for over a year. She has performed really consistently with multiple tops at YCSs. She came top 4 at her nationals in the UK, which were also really big. She just knows this deck in and out. The top 4 match versus Yoho in the first game, she just played out of her mind. He had really big interruptions that 2 times basically took her entire field off of her. But she still managed to pull through with her combo. She just knows every single edge of this deck. She knows every single interaction that you can have. If your opponent doesn't know the deck too well, they can be confused or surprised by some niche effects that they haven't maybe read before, because it's just like Yu-Gi-Oh! Texts are really, really big. And if you're missing one sentence, you might end up losing a game. And I think she just perfected this deck, and it was a great call for the event. So kudos.
Yeah, for sure. Congratulations to her for making it and piloting this deck so well. So I think it's an outstanding performance to see from outside too. And I actually want to watch one of the moments that really caught my eye and talk about this one in a little bit more depth. So let me share again the screen, and then we can watch this exact moment here, which I'm not really sure if we have audio on that one, but we will hear your voice too then. So I will just play it up.
Oh, look at that. He's just spreading his hand onto the table. Classic.
So what we are seeing here, I will pause it for just a second for all the Flesh and Blood players that are don't knowing what is going on now. We have Yoho here at the bottom with the green sleeves, and he is setting up a field of 5 spell or trap cards. So he has like 5 different cards that we don't know which they are or what they will do. And now it's Jessica's turn, and we already see like Jessica has 1 win already. So in Yu-Gi-Oh! You need 2 wins out of 3 to take the win home. And Yoho is starting here the game, and he has like 5 threats already on the board that could interrupt Jessica's play. And like Leonard, like you said, Rika is really reluctant on like setting up the combo, starting the combo, and so here it should be a really problem for Jessica. But let's continue.
Applause
from the crowd.
The
We
crowd
love it.
is loving it. They're celebrating the classic. Almost that one, but there's the others.
No, and she shakes her hand. Jessica Robinson advances to the final with the Harpies Feather Duster 4.
Okay, like you were really screaming. It was an intense moment for you, right? Maybe you can explain a little bit further what is going on here.
Yes, so Harpies Feather Duster is a really old card that has been forbidden for basically most of Yu-Gi-Oh! And what it does is just destroy all these spell and trap cards on the field on the opposing side, which is an incredibly strong effect, which is why it is also limited to 1. So it's really hard to draw it in a deck of 40 cards, where you only get 5 cards in your starting hand. If you're going second, there is a 6th one as a draw. And there are answers to this. Cards that just negate the Harpies Feather Duster, but if you also do not draw those, then 5 cards will hit you. You could argue for Yo being a bit greedy and setting all the 5 cards in Time Wizard format as well. People just never do this, because there are cards that do this. But if you're playing against an explosive deck like Rika, there is no chance that you're not going to set all of those 5 cards, because you might just very well need them. And yeah, this this just instantly ended the game, because as I said earlier, you are starting with 5 cards. If you are trading those 5 cards for just 1 card on Jessica's side, then you are going to get run over by 5 more cards. So yeah, that was really crazy, because from the second we saw the Feather Duster hitting the field and there was no answer from Yo, we knew, okay, Jessica's in the finals. So that was a less than 1 minute game.
Wow, that's really impressive, because like you already told us, the Feather Duster is one of the most powerful cards, and to actually draw it, you have to have some luck, because you're actually siding this card in, right?
Yeah. I think she's played it in the main deck. She was aware, she's a fantastic deck builder, that this deck is a rather bad matchup for her, the trap-heavy Labyrinth deck. And so she wanted to have some outs for the main deck as well. So you just not only have a chance to win going second and going third, or going in game 2 or game 3. Sorry about that. But yeah, she also wanted to be able to win game 1.
Wow. Okay, that's really impressive to hear too, that she actually mains this card. And I have the deck list here, and you're right. The Feather Duster is in the main deck, and then there are 2 more back row removals. As for the spell slot, the Cyclone, it's also in the side deck. So wow, it's really impressive to see her then clash on with this card on the table and win and making it to the finals. So would you say, like, what's really interesting for me to hear from you, because I see some of the most powerful cards from back then actually legal for play today in the modern Yu-Gi-Oh? And would you say like you do have a really good chance when playing these old cards today, like Yatagarasu or even other cards that were changing, like Change of Heart? Or is it like, yeah, they are there, but it's not that important that they are legal to play?
It depends on the card. The most simplistic ones are usually the best ones, because those cards, like Feather Duster, just destroy all spell trap cards in a crazy powerful effect. Change of Heart, just take control over one monster your opponent controls, also absolutely powerful. If your opponent sets up a really strong monster that can't protect itself from spell effects, then you can just take it and maybe even win the game in the entire turn. Change of Heart has really seen a lot of play ever since it was back to 1 again. Yatagarasu is a card that really has a niche effect, and it also only was really that strong back in the day because of one powerful interaction, which is also not that powerful anymore. So Yatagarasu is a card that is probably never going to see any play again anymore.
Yeah. Okay, so I think for me this question is really important because as we already saw in Yu-Gi-Oh, like one card can win you the game immediately, and that is really powerful, but you have to win 2 games in order to take the win out of the game. And in Flesh and Blood it's quite different. And for all the Flesh and Blood listeners, I think this question for you is pretty important to hear, because can you imagine that Yu-Gi-Oh can be played best of 1 as it is in Flesh and Blood?
Yes, and the reason is that the Japanese YCSs are in the best of 1 format.
Oh.
I don't think that there were that many, but a Swiss friend of mine, Ralf Stutz, went to a Japanese YCS, and it was in fact the best of 1 format, so it is very well possible.
Wow, that's really, really interesting, because I didn't know that, and I thought your answer will be no. So, wow, okay, let's touch a little bit more.
I would not prefer it, to
Okay.
be fair. I really like the option of having a side deck, especially since main decks are so powerful and some matchups are just really dominant, that having a side deck just makes it a little bit more fair. The cards can control other decks more.
Okay, so I think when we talk about this, like best of 1, as you said with the side deck too, would you say Yu-Gi-Oh needs to change anything about their interaction? Like, for example, siding before the actual game begins?
No. I think that takes away the purpose of proper deck building in terms of the main deck. You want to I think that's really a skill issue there, that you want to have your main deck. You either take the active decision that you lose some matchups, and then that's just bad luck if you see them, or you want to build your main deck the way that you can win against everything, but then some matchups might suffer from that, or your deck is not as powerful in general, but you have safety backups. And I really like that diversity in there.
All right, okay. It's for me, from coming from a Yu-Gi-Oh background, as you know, playing always 2 games or 3, and then switching to Yu-Gi-Oh, switching to Flesh and Blood, where we only play 1 game and then it's over. And even in situations like the World Championship finals, where okay, we play 1 game and then you have the Harpy's Feather Duster, which doesn't happen in Flesh and Blood, but it's really interesting because Flesh and Blood actually does that. They decided to have like a maximum deck like in Yu-Gi-Oh 2, but you actually need to decide which cards from that pool of cards you put in when you see which hero your opponent is choosing. So I'm not sure if it would work in Yu-Gi-Oh or not, but it would be very different for sure. And I'm not sure if we see it or not. I don't think so, but it's interesting to talk about nonetheless.
Yeah, the pre-siding thing is in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a bit of a meme that people are doing this while. I mean, it would be considered cheating, of course, because you are siding after game one. But every time someone is playing a card in the main deck that is just particularly good against your deck, you're saying something like, "Yeah, that was pre-siding."
So is the Feather Duster pre-siding or not?
I mean, she had it in her main deck. I have seen the deck list on the computer back then, so I can tell you it wasn't pre-sided.
All right, so let's jump to. Sorry, I think just to clarify that in English and German we don't maybe have the same understanding of this word. With pre-siding, I understood like that it's just a joke, right?
Oh yeah. That is definitely just a joke.
Yeah, all right, cool. So I want to come to the last topic, which, like I said in the beginning, is a really important and amazing opportunity this year for all the Yu-Gi-Oh players that qualified for it, and that is the World Championship. Because not only did Jessica won the European Championship, but she has the chance to participate in this year's Worlds and to actually be there as the former best player from Europe. So can you sum up in a few words for all non-Yu-Gi-Oh players how can you qualify in Yu-Gi-Oh for the World Championship, and how many players are participating in the World Championship?
So for every World Championship, there are about 20 to 30 players from all around the world, and you can only get there through your continental qualifiers. So we just had the European Championship, which is also called the European World Championship Qualifier. There were 4 world spots in the main tournament, so the top 4 would get to Tokyo. And there was this points qualifier I've talked about earlier, where 3 spots were given out. So the best 3 players from those top 32 could advance to go to Tokyo.
Okay, so it's actually like a really small amount of players that have the chance to try out if they can compete with one of the best players from the other regions around the world. That's like
very elite.
That's like a really it's a really prestige way of showing that you are one of the best players in Yu-Gi-Oh, because not that many players actually get this chance ever in their life.
Yeah, once you have qualified for the World Championships for once, you are an absolute legend of the game. It's even more impressive to see that multiple players have already made it back-to-back to Worlds, like Jonas Koschel, or famous German player Joshua Schmidt, or Gabriel Soucy this time again. Second time to Worlds in a row even.
Yeah. Wow, congratulations to every player that made it this time, and best of luck. I would say it will be a challenge for sure. So.
Are you going to be watching?
Yes, I will for sure. I have watched some games from the European Championship that you commentated already, and I also think about going to one of the next tournaments to actually watch some games in person too, because I think it's really interesting and it must be a powerful feeling too, even when you don't play these modern decks yourself. So,
yeah, it's an absolute blast. I can just recommend coming to one of those events.
Yeah. So we will see us there in the future for sure.
I hope so.
So the last thing I want to do with you is now compare actually the situation that we have in Flesh and Blood for the World Championship, because there it is a little bit different. First of all, in Flesh and Blood, we have prize money that is given out at these events, and the world champion of the last year's World Championship was the winner of $100,000 on top of winning and being crowned the best Flesh and Blood player in the world. But we also have the situation that not only like a handful, so to say, players get to compete in this tournament, but we have multiple hundreds of the best players competing and getting a chance of playing in the World Championship. That doesn't mean that they are not as good as the Yu-Gi-Oh players, but it is quite a difference in the size number. And what I actually want to talk about with you a little bit more to give the Flesh and Blood players a little bit more context about the World Championship in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like, what kind of prizes does Yu-Gi-Oh! Players get there, and how is the World Championship different, a different event than the European Championship? So, for example, is it held in only one day, or is it split up in multiple days?
So, unfortunately, I have never attended the World Championship, but I know that the players are always taken on trips as well. They are there for over a week. I think the tournament is only in 2 days. There are lots of public events, so if you want to be there as a viewer, you can also do that. I think there will be tickets, though. I don't think that everyone can just turn up. Especially since it's in Tokyo this time, I think the listeners of this interview probably won't visit there. But yeah, they are going to go for some sightseeing around the area. So every player gets the chance, every foreign player gets the chance to look at the place, look at the different countries. And the pricing is no money, but there is exclusive promo cards and playmats and deck boxes that are of course really valuable because only very few players have them, and if you are a participant you're already getting loads and loads of stuff, but if you are topping or if you are the world champion, then I mean, look at how crazy it would be to just have a Yu-Gi-Oh card that only one person in the world has, right? So those are really valuable and amazing prizes.
Yeah, for sure. I myself think so too, like you, that this is like an amazing prize to have, and also just as a player to get to this event. I think it's one of the most amazing things that can happen to a Yu-Gi-Oh player in his life or in her life. Yeah, and I'm really curious to see it like you, and maybe we even watch some games together. Who knows?
That would be nice.
Yeah. So. I think this is not the last time that we've talked about this topic, but this is now the end of today's video, and I know you have a next meeting. What are you doing in a few minutes, so to say?
Yes, there's a big Pokemon Go community tournament going on right now, which is called, I think, this is Gym Breakers. And there are basically some different national teams, and Germany is playing in a few minutes, and I'm going to cast this, of course, with some other community members. So I'm really excited. I'm going to get my football jersey from the basement, and I'm going to throw it over and then see if Germany can win.
Yeah, let's hope so. And I wish you all of the best fun and luck there. So for all the viewers that want to connect with you, where can we actually find you on social media?
I'm on Twitter, and I'm not that active on Instagram. I'm mostly active on Twitter, König Lionheart, but I think you can put the link in the description as well.
Yes, yeah, I will show it for sure. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time and talking to me today about this topic, and we see us the next time.
Thank you for having me. See you.
Thank you so much for watching the interview until the end. Now here's how you can enter the giveaway for the Calling Birmingham Fabled package. Subscribe to this channel, like the video, and tell me in the comments why you want to go to the Calling Birmingham. And I also like to know if you are Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Flesh and Blood player. But what exactly are you getting in the Fabled package? You are getting entry to the main event at the Calling in Birmingham. You are also getting 3 side event vouchers that are worth £20 each. You are also getting a playmat with the artwork of Avalon, Archangel of Rebirth, that is given out for the first time. So I think collectors will be really looking for this playmat. And not only that, you are getting 3 event exclusive promos that are also given out for the first time at the Calling in Birmingham. And on top of that, you are getting a Coldfall Arachne Solitary Confinement promo card. But before we end this one, I really want to thank all my Patreons who support me in creating these videos and that are making possible that we can continue bringing out high quality content and traveling to all these big events. Thank you so much, and see you at the next one.